if your employees or your investors or your customers or even your spouse could live in your head for 1 second, they lose their mind.
Yep.
Like, they don't understand the kind of pressure that you're under. It is the loneliest job because you can't talk to your employees and express your concerns or worries. Right. You're completely by yourself.
Yep.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
Hello, welcome to API Futures. I'm Ann Chow, your guest host for today. I am the CEO and founder of the Rewired CEO and published author of Lead Bigger, the Transformative Power of Inclusion. I'm also the former CEO of AT&T Business. Today, I am so excited to have with me today our special guest, David Liu, CEO of the Kinjo Group. David, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this will be a great conversation. So let's, as a fellow CEO, let's start at the beginning. What was your very first job, and what did it teach you about work or leadership?
My first job, I would say, in college.
Yeah.
My last semester, I managed to find a course curriculum where I got 4 classes that all met on one day. And so I lined them up on the Tuesdays, and I actually was able to hold down like a full-time job. Okay. I had to pay for college and stuff. And I got a job with a small software development company that was run by these 2 women. And I look back on that experience working for them, and I realized they had imprinted in me the foundation for how to be an enlightened manager. These are 2 women who were super smart, from very, very different backgrounds, and had built an engineering business and a database company. I was brought in as the office manager, which meant I had to unjam the paper from the copy machine,
very complex,
the water, yeah. And one of my jobs was to format floppy disks. For much of the audience, don't even remember this, but there are boxes of 3.5-inch floppies. All the engineers needed them, and so my job was to format that. And I was so incompetent that I kept messing it up, and I would, instead of writing C: format A: I would inverse it. And the computer that was on the desk of the office managers had everything for the entire company: invoices, the budget, contracts. And I remember the day I went and typed in A: format C: and I said, wait, why is the floppy machine not buzzing? And I realized I just formatted the C drive and wiped out the entire company.
Holy moly.
Yeah, and I went into Flo and Jane's office and I said, oh my God, I don't believe I just did this, but I think I just wiped out the entire computer, thinking that they would just go into a rage. And I remember Jane leaning over her shoulder, pulling off her shelf. She goes, job security, and handed me this box, Norton on Erase. And I had to basically rebuild every header file for every file that was on that disk. And 2 months later, after I completed the task, I was supposed to format floppies again. I did it again. And I was like, this time I was smart enough to unplug the machine before it went through it. So only a part was destroyed. And I tell you this because, number one, the lesson I learned was how to manage with compassion, because clearly I was not worthy of their compassion, but they were so supportive and they saw something in me that clearly they've wanted to be advocates for. And I look back on that, when I left the company, when I graduated, they threw me a party, they gave me a bonus. And I realized that, if I look back on myself, I would never have thought that this was someone who had the potential to be a public company CEO for 20 years, so launch one of the early internet businesses. But their ability to sort of have compassion and to be patient and to not go crazy over mistakes really imprinted in me how to be a manager.
Yeah, that's incredible. What I love about your story is that what's most memorable about it are the bosses you had and how they treated you, right? I mean, you can almost imagine if they had criticized you, right? If they had punished you.
Oh, fired me on the spot.
Or they had grounds to fire you, no doubt, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You would have largely had a very different impression, right? Or foundation to your professional view of what leadership is and is not.
Absolutely. And I also think that it really imprinted in me, and I've had other bosses after that job, how important we have women leaders. Because there was a very different style, there's a different priority, and there was just a different level of compassion that was there that I found, oftentimes lacking in what it can be a very sort of like macho, machismo, like ego-driven, corporate world.
Yeah, for sure. It's ironic that, I'll tell you my story as well, because it hubs around my first boss, right? So I think this is a very interesting parallel. So for my first job, at AT&T, I was a network engineer. And my boss was a woman. There were not many women in tech, in this particular engineering network operations group. And when I started in my first week with her, she said to me, in 6 months, I'm going to go on vacation and I'm going to put you in charge of the group. Okay, if you can imagine being 20 something and being told, like walking in the door, you're going to have to be responsible for the group of what you know nothing about, right? Everyone's at least twice your age, right? With 20, 30 years of experience. And I reflect back on just that her willingness to take a risk on me, her willingness to say, hey, I see something in you and I just largely met you, right? I want to push you to realize some level of potential you don't even know you have, right?
And I think in those formative years, having someone believe in you when you don't even believe in yourself is transformative.
It is. And whether it's serendipitous or very much linked to what you said about women leaders, my first boss was a female, right? She was a female. And so I look back on that today, and even the way that she explored and just so committed to my potential, right? And how she assumed all the risk, right? Was just something, which is what your bosses did too, right? Yeah, incredible. So here's a question, next question. I get this question a lot, so I'm very, very curious about your answer to this one. Has being a CEO was that always part of your dream? I don't know, as a child, when you went to school, was it part of what you always wanted?
Oh my God, no. No. In fact, I'm not even sure I knew what a CEO was.
Yeah.
I had great aspirations to be a filmmaker. And I went to NYU for film. I, practiced my Oscars acceptance speech many times. It was 1983. There was not, unless you're Ang Lee, there was not a lot of room for other Asian filmmakers, particularly in America at that time. What I didn't realize, and only many years later did I sort of reflect on this, film school training was the perfect entrepreneurial training ground. And when you think about it, you have to write a script.
Yeah.
It's your business plan.
Yep.
You have to hire and cast your actors, hire your crew, which is hiring and HR. You have to raise the money to make the film, which obviously you have to do for business. And then you have to manage the budget, run a production cycle, and market it. So all the component pieces of running and building a business is baked into the process of making every film.
Yeah.
And I realized that the skills that I developed really enabled me to transition or actually embrace the life of an entrepreneur with probably the most important component that's not taught in business school or learned in Silicon Valley is the power of narrative and telling stories. And that is baked into the filmmaking process. And I realized if you want to motivate your staff, if you want to sell equity to an investor, if you want to sell your product to a potential customer, you have to tell a good story. And the power of narrative was something that I was able to really bring to bear. Now, none of that was in any ways like a blueprint to becoming a CEO, but that was just kind of happened by accident.
I somehow don't think that it was by accident. But
did you always want to be a CEO?
No, I also didn't have any idea what it meant. You're going to find this incredibly ironic, since this is, and for the audience, this is the first time that David and I have actually sat down together like this. I have another very similar parallel. So my dream when I was younger was to play in Carnegie Hall.
Oh my God.
So I went to Juilliard School, the pre-college division in New York, in Manhattan, for 7 years when I was a wee child. So I had this dream that's what I wanted to do. But I hit high school and realized that, as a child of immigrant parents, financial stability and financial growth and independence was very important to me. I realized that to be great at music was not enough, and I wasn't great. I was good. I was sufficient. That was not a high probability path to financial independence, right? And financial well-being. So, of course, I became an electrical engineer. But what I learned from that musical background, right? I also have drawn from that foundation, that early foundation of that passion and experience. I liken being a conductor to being a leader, right? When you think about being a conductor, you have all these different, parts, of, you have the woodwinds, you have the brass, you have percussion, right? So you have subgroups, teams of people within your orchestra. You have leads within those sub-teams, right? And in any performance, your job as the conductor is your back is to the audience. You are entirely focused on entertaining, right?
Of course.
The individuals in there, but also each section, but also the entirety of the orchestra. Right. And one of the things, and I think this is an incredible parallel to your storytelling comment, is I can give you a piece of music, right? And I can give the next person the same exact piece of music, but you as a musician, you as a musician, and you as a conductor, or whatever you might play, you are going to interpret it and deliver it completely differently, right? The same is true for strategy and plans and people and how you get the most out of the whole while getting the most out of every individual, right? There is so much art to it. It's not just science, right? And in the orchestra, if one person makes a mistake, it messes the whole performance up, right? So that lesson and that sort of that foundational belief that, we're all given the same piece of music, but how we decide to execute against it, how we decide to express ourselves, the audience that we're playing to are all incredibly important aspects. In fact, more important than the piece of music itself.
Right. Well, it's interesting. That first job I had, one of the women who was the founder had gone to University of London as a musicology PhD student. Wow. So she said that there was a direct link between music and engineering and coding. And so one of the things they did when they had to hire all these engineers, because they got this big contract from the US government, they hired all her musician friends. And so this office was filled with people who would come in with coats and tails because they had an audition that night as an opera or a violinist. And one of the things that I think, look, Asian parents can be sort of, talked about as like, risk adverse and want them, our kids to be, in engineering or, more secure and more risk adverse careers. But the function and the attribute of creativity that you're talking about is so important. And I remember I took this one engineering class when I attempted to go to graduate school, and it was one of those we're coding in Pascal. We had to do you had to do the classic okay, there are 4 checkout counters and there's so many people. This one's going this fast, and we were how to optimize that flow. And I remember, and I'm terrible at this stuff, so I was working all night on this code. And I was pages and pages and pages, and I brought it in, and I was so proud of myself. It was 20 pages of Pascal code, and I remember there was this one Ukrainian kid. He was 17 in a graduate program. And, he and I became friends because we were both kind of the misfits. And he goes, "Oh, did you finish the assignment?" I was like, yeah, I did. I was like, "Look." And I handed it. He was like, "Oh." And I was like, "Did you?" He was like, "Yeah." And he handed it to me. It was 2 pages. Mine was 15. I remember looking and reading his code, and it was it took my breath away.
Yeah, wow.
It was, and then for the first time, it made me realize how much creativity is actually in the act of engineering.
Yeah.
And it gave me a real appreciation for, there's different, the code can work, but mine will gobble up and consume all this, memory, and his was just beautiful.
So I do want to go back to, though, you did become a CEO, an incredibly successful one, an inspirational one. You are now also a CEO. What did that feel like? So when you first became a CEO, do you remember the feelings of
complete dread. It's like complete dread. I'm like a cautionary tale. And I'll tell you how I became CEO, and I think it'll also eliminate a lot. When we started the business, it was me and three other partners. One of them was my wife. And we came up with the idea, Michael was an amazing marketing guy. Rob was an incredible salesperson and really so good at presenting. Carly had all the content and design and branding. And I had worked at a couple of startups. And so I kind of was the guy who had managed the finances. I was doing the books. I was working with the bookkeeper. And then I had done some coding. And back then, we were publishing on AOL. So you're like writing letters to Rayman at AOL.com. And it was like crazy. And so we were a team. There was no boss. We were collaborating, and we raised the money from AOL. We launched, and then we had to do another round, and this time we had raised a lot more. We found a VC in Silicon Valley, and they came on board. And I remember at our first meeting, we had board meetings, and we had a board, right? And the VC goes, this Four Amigos thing is cute. Doesn't work. We need one person in charge. We need one person to be a CEO. And David, since you've been doing the finances and you're managing the books, you're the CEO. And I remember being like, wait, what?
Wait, what?
Why me? There's four of us here. And I think it's been working okay. And literally installed me in that position. And I remember after the first meeting where everyone came in and did the presentation, he ripped me a new one.
Wow.
He was just like, this is wrong, that is wrong, what are you doing? And just rained terror on me for like an hour. And I suddenly realized oh my God, everything had just changed. Yeah. And I'm stuck in this situation where my partners and my wife is now an employee.
Right.
And I have to now navigate, the feedback from these investors who just gave us millions of dollars.
That's right.
And the urgency of what they want us to do and managing that, it was it was like such a nightmare. And I remember thinking wow, I just won the booby prize here. Yeah. There was nothing sexy about being the CEO. It was all just horror.
Yeah.
And so when people say, oh, I want to be a CEO, I'm like, careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And a few years later, I remember going to one of these CEO conferences that the VC had, and, all the portfolio of CEOs are there. They trot out this guy who, was a former one who had 3 fabulous exits. So it was inspire all of us, and is all excited, right? Work harder for them. And he came out and he said one thing that really stuck with me. And he said, if your employees or your investors or your customers, or even your spouse could live in your head for 1 second, they'd lose their mind.
Yeah.
They don't understand the kind of pressure that you're under. And it is the loneliest job.
Yes.
I mean, the other day night we heard him say that too, right? On the happiness presentation. And he said, because you can't talk to your employees and express your concerns or worries. You can't talk to your board and say, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to work. Right. You can't talk to your investors, and your spouse doesn't want to hear about it.
That's right.
Right? They were just wanting to take out the garbage, or we're going to do the laundry. You're completely by yourself. Yeah. And I remember when he said that, it was just it hit me oh my God, he's expressing exactly how I feel. Right. And he encourages, he said, you need to network here with these other CEOs because they get it. They may not be dealing with the same issues, but they certainly understand the insane and kind of intense pressure that we're under. I mean, I wonder, you must have felt that, and then some, right? Because being Asian is one thing, where there is a rarity. Being an Asian female CEO, you're a unicorn.
Yeah. I was when I became CEO of AT&T Business, I was the first woman of color CEO in AT&T's over 140-year history. Right? Which, by the way, I did not know, thankfully, when they told me that this was the job they wanted me to do, because I probably would have, I don't know, fainted or something, right? But I had
you very... the bamboo and glass ceiling.
Yeah, I don't know about that, right? But For me, I had somewhat similar reaction, but a sort of a very different context. So I had been at AT&T for decades, or all different flavors of AT&T. Throughout my whole tenure there, I had 17 different jobs, 26 different bosses, right? So I was well versed and experienced in this unit, right? I had done virtually every single job in this operating unit, which was $35 billion with 35,000 people around the world, right? So I intellectually knew I could do it. I never in a million years thought I would get the job. Never, ever, ever. But I intellectually thought I could do it, like functionally do the job, right? So when they called me in to tell me that I got it, you'll appreciate this from your time in New York City, right? I'm from Jersey, so East Coast. What came out of my mouth was this. I said, "Are you freaking kidding me?" Right? And because I was, really? Like, for real.
Oh
right?
my God.
So it was a similar shock, right? It was a very similar shock. And as much as, what I think is so interesting about the role, like you get the role is so much bigger and so much more complex.
Right.
You may have many experiences that have led you to this moment, but you have not had the experience of doing it, right? So there is a bunch of like dread, fear, trepidation, like, oh my God, like what, right? Because you yourself hasn't changed. All of a sudden you have this new role, you have this new title, and that title and that role changes everything.
No, everyone looks at you differently.
Everyone looks at you
differently.
Right. So for me, I had decades of friendship in the business, right? I had been a peer to those who were now my direct reports, the dozen plus of them. For years, we grew up in the business together. And all of a sudden, I became their boss, right? And that switch got flicked, right? And I intellectually had thought about it, but emotionally, practically, in the day-to-day, who do you go to, like you said, for advice? Who do you go to blow off some steam? Who do you go to bounce many different scenarios or concerns that you have, right? Personnel issues, right? I mean, just the whole gamut of all of it, right? Because as you know, especially once you are the CEO, every one of your stakeholders is watching everything you do and say. Every single thing is out in, you have to be incredibly intentional about everything, right? How you manage your emotions, how you demonstrate confidence, but not ego, right? Just all of these different things.
No, and you have to almost see through the filter, because I remember one of the early meetings walking away going, was that person just kissing my ass? like, wait a minute. Like, you lose a sense of like, oh my God, this is actually an authentic conversation now, because there's a power structure that will always kind of cloud that.
That's right. And for me, it helped me see and develop an understanding of many and most relationships in business are transactional, right? The vast majority of relationships are transactional. And that is okay, right? You have, though, right, what you want for your life, to the broader picture of, what you want your life to be, and being the CEO of your life, you want to have as many meaningful relationships as you possibly can in your life, right? That's what carries forward. So while you're the CEO, though, it's very difficult, right? It's difficult to discern often, and you just don't have time many times to develop those meaningful relationships that will carry you, right? So you have to be super purposeful about it, right? And make time for it. You mentioned teams, right? And I have a view just like you do, which is, leadership, and certainly being a CEO, is really all about being a team, because you're there. Yeah. You're not actually the one on the front lines doing the work, right? You've got people, you're responsible for all the people and all the stakeholders, right? You've got to balance your focus with internal versus external. Your whole agenda and your purpose is very different than anyone else on your team, but the team is the business.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So can you share with us what are some of the key principles or key characteristics of high-performing teams, right? So when you were developing a team or creating a team, what is it that what's high performance?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I find that, and I'll be curious to also hear how you handle it, because I think there's such a difference between like such a massive operation with so much revenue that's already there, and then, us trying to build something out of ether, right? And so what I realized was that I needed to make sure that I fully embraced what I didn't know. Mm-hmm. and understand that, there's that initial instinct, particularly for founders, like, I'm going to do everything. I'll do the books, I'll do the sales, I'll do the, and to have that sense of being so essential. And very early on, we were very fortunate to actually bring together a group of people who were in their discipline, incredible, and they'd run their own business in that discipline. So my CTO had actually a software development company that we had actually had them develop a lot of our sort of early publishing tools. I managed to bring him on board to run my IT group. Our creative director had been a design firm. She and her husband had been working there. I was able to say, hey, join us on this adventure, come on and run our design group. Our head of sales had launched a magazine, and we managed to help him kind of get out of a sticky situation. We brought him on, and he became a head of sales. And what was essential about that was that they were good at what they did, but they thought like a business person. They felt like an entrepreneur. They were always more interested in making sure that we were doing efficiently, with like marketing and sales components supporting with content. I mean, it was actually an incredible, team. And that was like the early stage. And as we approached, and it was very quick in those early days, that we were approaching that point where we had to go public, I needed to bring adult supervision, right? Like, we were a bunch of kids, like literally we didn't know what we were doing, and things were just happening so fast. And this is where I think the Asian Foundation sort of helped. We're trained and taught to respect our elders, to be deferential, to and to have that, to understand the value of face and stuff. And I was able to bring on a 19-year audit partner from Arthur Andersen, who was the CFO of Bertelsmann and Random House.
Wow. Okay.
He was like, back then, like, I thought a really old guy, because he was in the 50s. I'm like so much older than that now, but and I think we developed a rapport because he was like, wait, this is not one of those crazy whippersnappers, Silicon Valley, bros. Here's someone who actually values my, and really wants a partnership. And it was essential that my CFO and I were like in perfect sync.
That's the most critical, right? The CEO-CFO relationship is.
And then and then my COO was also this older woman who had run all the warehouses and operations for Random House. And the two of them were comfortable reporting to me because I was respectful then. And that was like a critical moment where we brought in what I would call the adult supervision, teamed it with all these entrepreneurial energy, and we were able to really, kind of survive what was like a series of just insane sort of near-death experiences for an early, digital internet company.
So it's so interesting. There are actually, again, very many parallels. When I think about high-performing teams, for me, there are two foundational things, right? One is character for me, right? And I look for people who are very clear about what their values are. Respect for me is one of those foundational character values that is so important to me. And the other one is competence, right? You need to know what you don't know. So I'm very, very similar in this way. Throughout my whole career, I've had a very acute awareness of what I don't know, and figured out early on that the key to being a great leader is to build a great team that has an incredible diverse array of competencies, right? And your job as the leader is to bring out the best. Like it's just like my orchestra analogy: bring out the best in each individual, and bring out the best of the whole, right? To your comment about the domain leaders that you hired, right, in the beginning. I have also, so I'm going to put it in my words, not only do I look for character and competence, I also look for what I would call enterprise leadership skills, right? So they may be an expert in sales, but they always think about profitability, not just revenue, right? They may be an expert in customer care, but they understand the handoffs and they understand at least what kind of tools and technology they need to improve the customer experience, right? So they bring a broader purview, right, and are wired that way either because of their experience set or just their perspective, right? And so those connecting the dots to me are incredibly important. I also tend to look for people who actually deeply care, not just about their career's ambition, because there are plenty of people like that, but actually care deeply about customers and people and investors, right? And really think about your whole stakeholder ecosystem in any business, right? You have a set of stakeholders. It's not just your customers. It's not just your investors or shareholders. It's so much more than that,
No, exactly.
right?
Absolutely.
So that's my view. So this will be our last question to wrap up our incredible conversation, which I think what our audience here should derive out of this is that there are just, David and I couldn't have two more different backgrounds and journeys to our leadership, but the parallels to me are actually quite amazing.
There's some fundamental universal truths.
Yes, I think so, right? If our sample of two is any indication of accuracy, right? Okay, so here's the last question. Our Engage 2025 theme is leading for our future. What is your hope for the next generation of leaders, and what advice do you have for them?
Wow. This is, I have to really resist going very bleak on this. I mean, because there's a general worry, and I worry for my kids, I worry for the world. We're in a really chaotic moment.
We are.
And so beyond just the insanity that we're self-inflicting, you have now this threat and opportunity of AI that is going to upturn everything. Leaders are going to be required to be so much more multifaceted
Yes.
than we could get away with in the past. And I think, to put it in the context of the AAPI community,
Yes.
We don't have the luxury to just kind of stay in this lane of like the hardworking, risk adverse, let's
Diligent
just
team player.
right. I'm just going to do my engineering, whatever, because that's the first swath of jobs that have gone.
That's right.
Like you don't even bother going to law school.
Yeah.
Like most of the engineering jobs are being done by computer, and increasingly more and more so. And it's really the human capital jobs, the creative components of this that are going to be required. And I would urge, anyone who's watching who is Asian and who's like trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives, to really begin to what I would call get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes.
There's going to be relentless change happening, and you have to be able to adjust and pivot and adapt and really tap your creative side, because that's the thing that the computers aren't going to replace. And that's the area that I think, as an executive or as a leader, we have to really lean into and embrace and help, foster.
Yeah. That's beautiful and poignant and pointed, and I couldn't agree more. When I think about my children, I have two Gen Z daughters, right, who are both in the workforce. The younger one just entered the workforce, so I'm pretty happy about that. They're both gainfully employed, and I think about the advice that I give them, as well as others, right, other Gen Zers. I think about Gen Alpha coming up behind them. It is all about growing and learning, constantly growing and learning, right? And I would share that my career didn't really, quote unquote, take off until I realized that it was really just my authenticity, who I am and who I desire to be, was really the key to success, right? It was really just leaning into that. And so to everyone out there, I would tell you that your greatest superpower is you, right? Your job is to figure out what those superpowers are, how you develop them. But the way you develop them is that you keep going and you keep growing, right?
And there's no rush.
There is no rush, right? And so much of what I think is interesting in this little snippet about your journey or my journey is that it's not like we had some grandmaster plan, right? So, but every step we took, whether it was inflicted on us or whether we chose it, right? There was something that we learned from it with a mindset of growth and making ourselves better so that we could help make the business better, help other people become better, right? And all of those kinds of things. And so I would ask our next generation to be true to you, right? And be open, be flexible, get uncomfortable, right? I mean, the only constant, everybody says this, it's so true. The only constant is change. So if you're not comfortable with living with your fear or living with your vulnerability, and it's so interesting that we have both at this point in our lives and careers said this is a critical element to your growth, right? It's actually part of your leadership, secret sauce is how you harness and you work through those fears and those insecurities. That's what I would share.
And I think that as we were saying, we didn't have the resources
Right.
of Ascend or things like that when we were coming up, right? And having such a great energy and having so many people who, have your back, I think this next generation has great advantages that we clearly didn't have, and equally large challenges.
Yes, for sure. And on that note, I'll close with some other thoughts here, right? It's so true, David, that this generation, all of you who are part of Ascend in any which way, have been given an opportunity to be part of this gift of community, this gift of camaraderie. But it takes courage, right? And it takes conviction for you to lean into this and take advantage of all of the resources that you have to give as much as you're taking, and to be part of this moment and to be part of the change that needs to happen in the world, right? And I don't say that lightly. David, thank you so much for joining us. It has been actually so really much fun.
Thank you so much.
And great to spend some time with you. I very much look forward to partnering with you ongoing as we are in this part of our career and helping hundreds and thousands of others out there become all that they can possibly be.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube.